political. The Beat with Ari Melber starts right now. Hi, Ari. It was lovely spending a few extra hours with you last night.
I love sitting next to you instead of across from you through TV.
It's much fun. You can tell everyone when I had all my snacks there.
You want to talk about the snacks?
I had all my snacks.
It's not
there.
too personal?
You don't have to tell them what they. Well, I started healthy and I went downhill fast.
Why don't you give your quick tip, because this applies to anyone who's working late, unexpected, and you mentioned family obligations. When you skip a meal and you have more brain work to do, you explained what is your nutritional key?
Mine were M&Ms. I really did try with a healthy shake, and it was so gross. I turned to my trusted friend, the M&M.
That's what I was going to say, shake and candy. Nicole, we learned so much from you, sometimes about even the less important things. I'll see you soon around here.
Yeah, have a good show.
Absolutely. Our thanks to Nicole Wallace. Welcome to The Beat. I am Ari Melber. And as mentioned, the voters just spoke across Super Tuesday. The voters, drove many election developments. And as that night wore on, as Nicole and I sat there and traded some candy and traded ideas and tried to hydrate, it became clear from the results that most voters in both parties are now set on their choices. And so today we do have two presumptive nominees for what is clearly going to be a rematch of 2020. How different will it be this time? Well, James Carville, one of the most experienced campaign operatives in the nation, will be here tonight to break that down. We're looking forward to that. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, stay with us. Now, the reason that Republicans are done with their race is that today, the last opponent to former President Trump, Nikki Haley, exited the race after besting every other candidate in this field and building her candidacy from something that initially sounded fairly vague, at times even meek, according to critics. She developed, over time, her message and her operation into the most enduring, credible, conservative case against the unpopular, indicted former president.
For a strong America, for a proud America, I am running for President of the United States of America. We have to face the fact that Trump is the most disliked politician in America. We can't win a general election that way. I said I wanted Americans to have their voices heard. I have done that. I have no regrets. It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that.
Those last lines from Haley came today. She landed some punches. She built a following. Now she leaves with that note of some kind of hopeful or resilient grace, if you want to call it that, but also no rush to announce her intentions or an endorsement. So that's the big news tonight. That's a contrast to basically all other top Republicans who clashed with Trump. His primary opponents that you may remember, they rushed to endorse. His sometimes Senate foe, Mitch McConnell, also made news today by going through with it and publicly endorsing Trump as the presumptive nominee, a path that caps McConnell's retirement amidst what is an increasingly MAGA party among the elites anyway. So what did Haley do in her campaign? Tonight seems like a fitting night to take a look because it matters for the future and this rematch race. So I'm going to go through a couple things. One, she broke a barrier that few of the D.C. pundits initially predicted. She drew the most votes of anyone other than the former president in their field. And a former president's like a quasi-incumbent. This was also, we should note, a field of men. And in a party fixated on so many so-called macho issues, their word, not mine, let's note tonight, Haley, now the first woman to win any Republican state primary ever. Pretty striking. Took until 2024 for that to happen. And thus, she is also the first woman of color to do so. Second, while several Republicans memorably ran as fairly predictable MAGA mini-me's, Haley demonstrated a pretty strong block of voters exist who oppose Trump. She exposed cracks in the support that he needs, that he has to fix if he has any hope of making up what was his 2020 deficit in this rematch to win in November. Now, there's no reliable way to predict elections. I've told you that before. That's just a fact. You got to wait and listen to the voters. But history also shows how often the D.C. pundits get it wrong, and they rarely admit it. They spent months talking up Haley's mostly male rivals, including especially Ron DeSantis. In other words, before the Republican voters ever spoke, we heard a lot about Ron DeSantis. And we also heard that Trump has a supposed stranglehold on Republican voters. Well, the only way to test that claim is to check in with Republican voters. And it turns out, even as those other candidates dropped, even as the headlines blared that Trump was going to be the inevitable nominee, and some of that proved to be the case yesterday, there was still a very large, underappreciated, often undercounted share of Republican primary voters who were against Trump. So we learned that over these 3 months, powered often by Haley. Last night, we had more people go out to the polls than any other day this year. So we'd be remiss here on the news if we didn't share with you some of that news, because Haley's campaign also showed breadth. Overall, now we can show you over a quarter of primary voters went for Haley in 11 different states. That's sort of her floor. A larger share went against Trump, distributed across other candidates if you count those early states. Then the news gets worse for Trump when you look at where he's bleeding out. Because any Republican nominee can be fine in safe red states like Texas, can afford to even lose a few points over any reason and still win. Any generic Republican wins Texas. But Haley showed Trump's largest problems in his party are in the states that he actually would need to win back for a November victory, like Colorado, or states he needs to hold on to, like North Carolina, and the places with more independents who often can define general elections. Another problem for Trump, because Haley won 40% in New Hampshire, 35% in Virginia. Historically, you need United Party support to win these states. And historically, Republican candidates who have rebounded from divided primaries often did so by forging a team, be it on the ticket or through endorsements that healed primary cracks. Now, Trump aides know what he may be loath to admit today. The candidate who he did beat last night, and that was a big headline, Nikki Haley, could actually have more sway over his election chances than many other factors, including what he says and what he posts online, all the things that may occupy his time. He may not like that, but that is one of the iron laws of divided primaries that history shows. Not a prediction, but more of an observation from the past. Now, if what I showed you briefly there, the Bush-Reagan reunion where they decided to make up and campaign together, if she joined him and made a strong pitch to her voters, who are this sizable group in some key places, that could matter a lot. And that may depend on what he does and what she concludes about this race. We heard a little bit from her today. As for those Haley voters, here's what some of them are saying now.
If it ends up being Trump or Biden, how do you think you'll vote in 2024?
You know, that's a really good question. It's probably going to be Biden, just because it's been, 4 years and he hasn't divided.
So if she doesn't end up winning the primary and getting the electoral vote,
right,
would you vote for Donald Trump in November?
I'm not sure. I don't know what to do.
Sounds pretty straightforward, pretty honest. Those are people, those are examples, but those are people in the street, as we say, people in the street interviews, where Nikki Haley, what she says and does in these weeks and months ahead could matter a lot to them. So we hear a lot from Washington. We got a lot of lectures about how hot Ron DeSantis would be or how things would go down. And turns out we have to do something pretty traditional sometimes, even in this cacophony of all of this polarization and new technology and new stuff. Sometimes in a democracy, you have to just buckle up, pay attention, listen to the voters. And there's plenty to be depressed about in America. I'm not going to sugarcoat any of that for you here on the news, but it is interesting and perhaps hopeful to see some change, some premises smashed, some barriers broken, and the voters telling a story that at least is more nuanced, more rich, more thoughtful than some of what we were lectured about from the pundits earlier in this cycle. With that in mind, we begin our coverage with Margaret Carlson, Washington Monthly writer, longtime D.C. observer, friend of the beat. Welcome. Your thoughts on what Haley showed us?
Well, this is the last time I'll be able to say that Haley's comment went up after the second debate. All the billionaires rushed in to support her. There were the Koch brothers, there was Jamie Dimon, and on, and it looked like she was the one. And wasn't it a surprise that all the men went down and she was the one who sustained that campaign? I thought it was remarkable, and she got better as she went along, because at the beginning, I think Ari, you and I talked about, she tried to have it both ways, especially on abortion. You know, I'm for it, I'm against it, there's no national ban, I'm for 6 weeks, I'm for 20 weeks. She got caught in Iowa, and then I wondered if she had spoken out more forcefully on that issue, she might have done better in Iowa, but she was killed in Iowa, and I think partly because the evangelicals there thought she was pro-choice because she had just done both, and that's a huge issue now. She's done an amazing thing, which is she put away Vivek Ramaswamy. What is it? We get dumber. Every time you open your mouth, we get dumber.
I remember that line.
And went on from there, and she got him, chastened. Ron DeSantis, can you remember how much he was the guy?
Yeah.
And then he wasn't the guy. And by the way, she did it. She doesn't get credit for that. Everything was behind Ron DeSantis. And I think if she'd moved more over to where Chris Christie was and became more anti-Trump, she might have, done more. But she's done something, which is that 30%, 25 to 30% that were able to express how they felt, which is they're anti-Trump, they're looking for someone else. She did that. So it was a great night for her. And isn't it sad when they say goodbye? You put your whole heart into it, and I've covered enough of them. It's grueling and it's tiring, and you don't get enough sleep, and the crowds get small, and then on one night you just have to give it up. It's really hard.
Yeah, you're reminding us the human side of that, and she did evolve over time, and these are dynamic processes. And we have a lot of know-it-alls, and I mentioned the smugness of some of the people in D.C. and some of the people in the right wing who had their own agenda. They wanted to diminish this process. They wanted to treat it as over because they'd already made their bones, money, or deals with Donald Trump. But that's not democracy, right? And Republicans, call me old-fashioned, Margaret, I think Republicans are just as much entitled to a real democracy as Democrats. And I think the effort to short-circuit the race, which of course began with Trump trying to get the RNC to cancel elections, no surprise from him, it didn't work. It may have partly backfired, and she found all of that energy. We've asked you and your bookshelf, if you're both willing, to stay with us. We have our shortest break, which is just 60 seconds. We're going to have more Margaret. And as mentioned, coming up, James Carville building on decades of experience and the road ahead.
I hope this sets a precedent in presidential elections. I think the American people are real winners. I just couldn't be more pleased with the debate, the way that it went, the whole thing. I mean, it was good and grits.
Donald Trump lost in 2018. He lost it for us in 2020. He lost it for us in 2022. Everything he touches, we lose.
One of Nikki Haley's key points there was about the mathematical facts that so many like to put to the side, that Donald Trump has not exactly been a boon to the Republican Party, even if he has affected American life for a long time now. Haley has now officially been the last person standing and come in second in a Republican primary with Trump. We are joined by Ron Nehring, who worked for the last person in that position. He was Ted Cruz's spokesperson. Senator Cruz memorably also came in second and had a long run against Trump that year. Margaret back with us as promised. Ron, what have we learned here coming out of Super Tuesday?
Well, the process this time is even shorter than it was when I was Senator Cruz's spokesman in 2016. Here it is March, and the process is effectively over. Senator Cruz made it to May 3rd, so significantly longer, and many more Americans had the opportunity to weigh in. But there's been this real effort internally within the Republican Party to wrap this up early. And the reality is that, candidates don't like primary elections, but primaries make you a stronger candidate. I think that by short-circuiting this primary process, that the opportunity to get better and stronger and learn for this election cycle has kind of been missed. I think your point about those states where Nikki Haley did the best are many of those battleground states that have large suburban populations, and it's going to be suburbia, regardless of what states they happen to live in. It's suburban America that's going to ultimately decide between Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Yeah. And Ron, there was no love lost between your then boss, Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump. It got a lot rougher on both sides than this thing ever did. And Ted Cruz ultimately said at the convention, vote your conscience, and then became a super Trump supporter when he was in office. I'm not asking you to, relitigate every aspect of that. But what does that tell you about what's possible for Haley? How much room she has here? And do you expect that if she is a living, breathing Republican and she was already moderately conciliatory today, that she would go more down the Cruz lane, or it's too early to tell?
Well, politics is the art of the possible. And one of the things that really factors into the thinking of a lot of candidates, particularly those who are under the age of 60, is positioning for the future. And what does the future hold? And what's the best pathway that allows them to continue to be in some leadership role within the Republican Party and within government? So you could bet that was a calculation with every single one of these candidates. But I think all of them succumb to the following reality, that they've spent the entire time since Donald Trump wrapped up the nomination, May 3rd, 2016, they've spent all of this time kind of waving him through. So no matter what he said, no matter what he did, no matter how outrageous it was or incompatible with Republican principle, they waved it through. They said it was just the liberal media. These are all the never Trumpers and haters and, irrational people. And then that's fine. But then when you try to run against the person who you've been waving through, you've created a permission structure for Republican voters to just stick with what they know. And that's what they've decided to do. Yeah,
I think that's a fair analysis. I'll let Margaret join us in a second. I want to play something. But I think a lot of viewers listening to you, whether they like Ted Cruz or not, might hear what you're saying, and it makes sense. And that permission structure is a problem, perhaps, for some. I want to show, and Margaret, you alluded to this just moments ago. Initially, in the campaign, Haley, who of course served for Donald Trump, who was introduced to the party that way, she avoided throwing many punches. In her first comments, even about the bombshell criminal indictment, she walked a careful line.
I've lost count of how many indictments it is. And I will tell you, with this last one, I wasn't quick to comment like everybody else, because I'm not going to keep commenting on every Trump drama.
That was a kind of dodge, and reducing a actual criminal indictment to, quote, drama seems to, of course, misunderstand or deliberately avoid the issue. Either it's something significant, you deal with it, or if you think it is a complete sham indictment, then that's worth discussing. Either way, it's not drama. Over time, though, as Margaret and others have mentioned, Haley got sharper.
Many of the same politicians who now publicly embrace Trump privately dread him. I think what happened on January 6th was a terrible day.
He is not the same person he was in 2016. He is unhinged.
I think President Trump will have to answer for it.
Margaret?
Well, maybe too late. She did that. I mean, her lowest moment was when, like the rest of the sheep, she raised her hand and said she would support Trump if he were the nominee. And shortly after that, she said she would pardon him if she became president. But she moved on from that, and she got better, and it takes a while. And as Ron knows that, I think by the time Ted Cruz was in Indiana, I think it was Indianapolis, the last primary that he was in that tobacco warehouse, he was a good candidate. And as everyone is when the time is running out, it was a kind of sad event. But he got much better, and nobody really good got in this time from the last campaign. So we had Haley, and we had Ron, and we had Vivek, and I don't think she got to sharpen her message until the underbrush was cleared out, and it was her on stage, and she did it. She was fudging her positions at the beginning. She got stronger on those, and as she got stronger on Trump, and she almost became a never Trumper. It's going to be interesting to see, does she tiptoe back like so many have? Look at how many times Mitch McConnell has gone to the brink, and then he's come back into the fold. What will she do? I don't know. The pressure is out there. I hope she withstands it. It would be a wonderful thing if she were the one, if it was a woman who did it.
Well, she does have some leverage. We'll see what she does with it. Margaret and Ron, thank you so much. It's a packed show, and we're moving because James Carville is our guest next. Stay with us.
Polls ever. Election is a volatile thing. We're running against people that have demonstrated the fact that they are willing to do or say anything to maintain their grip on power. I'm very nervous all the way up to Election Day.
Facts over polls, some timeless wisdom from James Carville. I'll see you in a second. The Super Tuesday results are ushering in the start to the general election. We are thrilled to come back with James here. And tonight, for the first time, we can report both parties each now have a presumptive nominee. Haley's exit from the race after Trump's wins last night tees up a Biden-Trump rematch. So even though we love our election music, we might need to change it to something more fitting. Someone else, new choices. People are not celebrating as they did in the Daft Punk classic. And there's a lot of commentary and merch making a similar point. If you go back across history, losing candidates don't usually make another run at the White House. Losing presidents rarely ask the electorate to give them another chance, which is why there's a teddy bear on your screen. You'd have to go back to the original inspiration for the teddy bear for an example of a former president running again, like when former President Teddy Roosevelt ran for the old job he had against the current president, Taft. It was dubbed the Great Mustache Election of 1912. Trump is hoping for a different outcome than that former president, who lost in what was a three-way race to Wilson. Now, we should know Democrats keep beating expectations in recent elections. Strong midterms in 2022, the 2018 blue wave. Biden, of course, beating Trump in 2020. But the Electoral College actually makes things much closer. Consider, as we're now in this Daft Punk rematch, that Trump first won the Electoral College with 3 close states and a combined margin, you see right there, of 77,000. 7 million more Americans chose Biden last time, of course, but in the 3 closest states that cycle, his total margin was also super narrow, coming in around 42,000 in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia combined. So yes, it's one more time for this standoff, with many Americans telling us they're over it before it even begins. Now, as promised, I want to welcome back James and tell you, James, in your honor, we want to tell you this is a special day that we are inaugurating today, and we hope it repeats. We're calling it James Day. You can see the new graphic there with you and other presidents and you throughout the years. Welcome back, sir. Welcome to James Day.
Well, thank you. What an honor to have a day named after me.
Right? We're not the government, but
it's a day that lives in infamy.
Well, FDR, I hope not. We'll make it live in wisdom.
There we go.
I played Daft Punk. A lot of people remember that classic song, One More Time We're Going to Celebrate, because the song's about people wanting to celebrate again. I know you love Mardi Gras and music and celebrations. Right. I think you also know the facts. And on both sides, there's a lot of people who aren't ushering in this one more time. So with that mood, what do you see coming out of Super Tuesday? What's important? What are you watching? What do you say to that?
Well, the polling is discouraging. It's a little bit like walking on your grandma naked. It's hard to unsee them. I mean, but there are some things that are in President Biden's favor. Trump is massively unpopular also. And I saw something today in a Tom Edsall column that fascinated me. 45% of Americans don't know anything or very little about the charges against Trump. So to me, that tells me there's a knowledge vacuum out there. Usually when you have 2 incumbents, everything is known about both of them, and it's kind of hard to move numbers. But I thought that was encouraging. And this trial coming up on March 25th is going to be a pretty big event. People, I think, are downplaying that. And I think if he's acquitted or hung jury, it's going to give his people a big boost and a lot of energy. However, you well know that once you're convicted of a felony, your entire life changes. I mean, you don't have the same day. You have to give up your passport. You got to get permission to travel. It probably won't jail him pending appeal, but when you're convicted, it's a different world that he's going to live in. And so I think we're going to have to pay sufficient attention to that. I don't know if the legal process is going to save us. A lot of people try to believe that, but there's a lot of knowledge to fill in that the Democrats and President Biden can do that I think can help some. We need help. I'm not sugarcoating this thing at all. We're not in an advantageous position right now.
Interesting to hear you put it like that, starkly. We showed old James agreeing with new James, current James, that polls only take you so far. We saw that in the clip. But last night we got a lot of results. I was telling viewers that we heard from more states with more voters last night than any other point this year, and big states. So the population represented last night was roughly over 40% of America. And so I'm curious what you make of what they're saying. Biden's not running with real strong opponents, but we're seeing numbers that rival the Obama reelection numbers in terms of his unifying the Democratic Party, even amidst the issues you mentioned. And we see Trump putting up numbers that got Haley out, but don't yet show party unity. What do you take from the numbers last night?
Well, I don't take, I mean, they both had commanding leads all the way through. President Biden did not have, very much opposition. Haley, ran a gutsy campaign. She got 25, 30% in a lot of places. But, all right, this is what I really think. We're going to have a hard time replicating the 2020 coalition, particularly among under 30 and non-white. And for President Biden to come back to win this thing, we're going to have to do better with kind of middle voters, swing voters, loosely aligned, which the good news is we are doing that. We're not winning elections on turnout. We're actually winning elections with, I don't know a better word than swing voters, I'd say less hardly aligned voters we're doing pretty well with. And I see that across the board. We're going to have to do that. We cannot rely on Democratic turnout to carry the day for us.
It's striking to hear you say that because, James, the under 30 was the single largest largest edge Biden had demographically over Trump last time.
Well, black voters for sure, but the black numbers are tepid. I mean, we got to address that, and I don't know if it's possible to replicate the 2020. And the under 30 is decidedly unenthusiastic or detached right now. I mean, that's pretty clear. Now, what I'm sure the White House would say is, look, and at the end of the day, they're going to come back. The question is, did they come back in sufficient numbers with sufficient turnout? I just don't think we can rely on the same coalition this November as we did November 4 years ago. I really don't. I'd like to be proven wrong, trust me.
No, I know you would, but we appreciate your candor, and people at the White House and the Biden campaign would be concerned about what you're saying because that was part of the coalition. First-time voters, young voters, and as you say, a lot of black and brown Democratic voters and soft sporadics who basically said, yeah, we got to do this, got to stop Trump, and COVID didn't help Trump. On the Republican side, though, again, we're trying to do both here and be accurate. I want to show you the numbers I mentioned earlier in the broadcast. This is before you joined us. This was before probably both of the old school clips I played of you, James. Nikki Haley won 25% of the vote here in 11 states this cycle. That's new numbers from last night. The support for Haley in critical swing states mentioned even higher than other places. Then we have limited exit polling. This is just from a couple of places, but where the question was asked, and this has to do with sort of how they poll it. They didn't do it everywhere, but in the states selected, pretty strong third of those voters saying they're not going to back the GOP nominee in November, which we were discussing this last night with Rachel and Lawrence and everyone. That's understood to refer to Trump. Biden now saying, quote, Trump made it clear he doesn't want Haley's supporters. I want to be clear there's a place for them in my campaign. James?
Oh, please, there's their place for you. Yeah, we need these voters. And I've never, I got to say, Trump says things that I've never heard anyone say before. I've never heard a politician, maybe somebody point out, say, I don't want these voters. I mean, usually politicians are, yeah, sure, come on, welcome to the party. He's weak, and that's the encouraging part. He's weak, and he says he's getting increasingly crazy. I don't know how to judge it. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything like that. But he's always said a lot of really stupid things, but he looks like he's increasing, and we're going to need that. We're going to need those Haley voters. We're going to need Trump to make a lot of gaffes, and we're going to need to catch up.
So what do Democrats say to those Haley voters?
That you don't want a criminal in the White House. You don't want somebody who a lot of people was treasonous, that was colluding with Putin, that was showing national security documents, that was disobeying, not responding to legal subpoenas and requests from the archives. that a guy that's got adjudicated by jury to have sexually assaulted, in the words of the judge, raped a woman. People don't know that. Was adjudicated by the court of law as being a business fraud of the first order, to the extent that he was ordered to pay like $400-something million, and had a receiver that is now in charge of his properties in New York City. So there's a lot of information there that these loosely aligned voters don't have yet, and a lot of these voters, Haley voters that don't like Trump, she was getting 30%, 35%. You just put the numbers on there. Those are terrible numbers for a president who's in effect an incumbent. So his weakness is real, and it has to be exploited, and there's a lot of wet work left to do, if you know what I mean.
I do, because I learn more words from you than from dictionary.com, and they're better words. They're words I end up using more, from the wet work to the barn and back around the barn. So, James, you've agreed to stay because it is James Day. You've agreed to stay for an extra segment. We're going to finish a break. Mitch McConnell made big news today that sounded very different than how he sounded Jan 7th. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Carville.